debate, courtesy of South Carolina Education Television. Senator Lindsey Graham is seeking his second term in office after winning 55% of the votes in the 2002 election. His challenger is Democrat Bob Conley. This race has been deemed safe Republican by CQPolitics.com. This debate took place on Saturday and runs about an hour.
Good evening and welcome to this live broadcast originating from our studios in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm Mark Quinn. ETV and the state newspaper are proud to present a debate between two gentlemen vying to represent the state of South Carolina in the United States Senate. We will introduce you to those two gentlemen in just a moment, but first I wanted to welcome in our statewide ETV radio audience and those of you who are watching and listening on our website at myetv.org. Joining me here to ask questions tonight to help me along in this debate is my colleague from the state newspaper, Leroy Chapman. Leroy, great to have you along.
Thank you.
And just for the benefit of you folks out there at home wondering exactly how this debate is structured, we will ask a question of each candidate. They will have 90 seconds to respond and then 30 seconds for any needed rebuttals. Time to meet the candidates. We will start with the challenger. He is from Myrtle Beach. He is an engineer and a professional pilot. He is Bob Conley. Mr. Conley, glad to have you here.
Nice to be here.
The incumbent is Senator Lindsey Graham from Seneca, South Carolina. Senator Graham, glad to have you here as well.
Thank you, sir.
Each candidate will now address the audience. They will have a minute to talk to you folks out there at home. We will start with Senator Graham in this round. Towards the end of the program, we'll give each candidate a minute again to address the audience. We will give Bob Conley the last word in that particular round. Senator Graham, if you would.
Well, one, I want to thank ETV and the state newspaper for hosting the debate, and for those who are going to watch and check out the two candidates tonight. It's been a really quick 5.5 years in the Senate. Lots happened. I know times are tough here at home and throughout the country. People worried about, paying the bills, staying in their homes. Now's the time to keep your taxes low. Now's the time to control spending in Washington. But more than anything else, I just want to thank you for the opportunity of having represented our state. And if I go back to Washington, I know who I am, I know what I believe, and I know what I want to do for our state and nation. So as we understand the differences between myself and my opponent, understand this. Democracy is a wonderful thing. Make sure you vote. Tell your friends to vote.
Mr. Conley, if you would address the audience, you have a minute as well.
Good evening. I'm Bob Conley, your nominee for United States Senate. Running for the United States Senate is a very large undertaking, and I've devoted the last few months of my life to this task so that I have the opportunity to better the lives of my fellow South Carolinians who have been ignored by Congress. For far too long, we have had public policy enacted by self-serving career politicians who do the bidding for the large, powerful, and wealthy special interests that pump millions of dollars into their campaigns. I'm not a career politician. I'm not a lawyer, and I haven't received millions from special interests. I'm Bob Conley. I'm running to represent you in the United States Senate, and the contrast between my opponent and me could not be clearer.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Now we'll open up the floor with questions. Senator Graham, I will start with you. This first section dealing with the economy, much on the minds of many Americans right now. The Wall Street Journal said yesterday, their headline was, "We have experienced a slow motion market crash." Prominent economists now saying we're on the precipice, perhaps, of another Great Depression. Right now, as we talk to you tonight, what is your working definition of the situation we're in? Are we staring at another Great Depression?
Well, I think what the president did today to meet with world leaders defines the problem we have. This is a world problem. And what happened is a lot of people were lent money that couldn't afford to make the payments on homes. And those mortgages were repackaged and resold. And lending institutions all over the world have these bad debts. And as a result, banks and lending institutions and financial institutions are failing. And people here in South Carolina, if you wanted to borrow money to expand your business, to send your kid to college, or to buy a house, credit is very hard to come by. But here's some good news. I think things are going to stabilize here soon. The bank-to-bank lending is beginning to happen. What one bank will charge another to borrow money, that rate is going down. And I think what Secretary Paulson is trying to do to intervene into the banking system to put capital in place will allow credit to begin to flow. And in a free market, if you can't borrow money, most of us don't have enough money to go just purchase a house. So borrowing money, having available affordable credit is the key to any free market economy. And I think you're going to see some stabilization in that area where banks begin to lend again, and that will stabilize the stock market over time. But tough times await us. I'm glad that we've got a guy like Secretary Paulson who understands the nature of the problem, and I support what he's doing.
Mr. Conley, let me ask you a similar type question. How would you describe the current financial crisis? A working definition, if you would. What would you tell people on the campaign trail as they ask you the kind of situation that we're currently in?
Currently, what we are seeing is our federal government intervening in a market where that same federal government, due to legislation that was passed in recent years, repealing safeguards that we had in place, repealing regulations that have been in place since the 30s, since the wake of Herbert Hoover, that we've seen this burden really shifting from the investment class and from the bankers who went and made bad decisions. They've gone to Washington and they've gotten the career politicians there to appropriate money for bailouts. We see the bankers' billion-dollar bailout, and I think that was wrong. And we take a look at not only that, but we see the $630 billion that the Fed pumped out earlier that week. That's an increase of almost 10% in the monetary base, which is inflation. It's devaluing the currency of Americans, especially the folks who are especially hurting are the retirees. I think what we're going to see as the government continues to engage in this, that market is probably going to go down to the low 3,000 range. And we're looking in a lot of ways at relearning the lessons of Herbert Hoover all over again. And what we need to do is be policing Wall Street. We need to reenact those regulations that kept banking, insurance, and brokerage separate for 70 years. And it's time to say, hey, if we're going to have confidence in the market, bad companies need to be allowed to fail.
Thank you, sir. Our next round of questioning belongs to my colleague, Leroy Chapman.
Senator Graham, you referenced Secretary Paulson's action yesterday. Some folks have criticized this as being a path to socialism, talking about the fact that the American taxpayer will now own a large part of the financial sector. Why are those folks wrong?
Well, to me, what we did in the Depression was that we raised taxes. Herbert Hoover, during bad economic times, raised taxes. We don't need to do that. We need to control federal spending and cut your taxes. But what we've done here is we've tried to jumpstart credit. And the taxpayer is secured in this plan. What we're going to do is make sure that banks and financial institutions that own these mortgages where there's no income stream, that we will buy these mortgages and we will hold them. And when the house sells, we'll get our money back. But the money that we pay for these mortgages is going to be about 30 or 40 cents on the dollar of what they're worth. We actually could make money, but that money that we pump into the system by getting these bad debts out, that money will be lent to people here in South Carolina to expand their business, to buy a car, to send their kids to college. If you can't borrow money, you can't grow this economy. So what we're trying to do is interject into the system new capital that will go to consumers. And what I try to do is protect the people I grew up with. My mom and dad owned a restaurant, a small business, and sometimes we had to go borrow money during tough times to keep the business running. And that's what's the nature of the problem, the lack of available, affordable credit, and interjecting now before the business fails is what this is about, in a way to protect the taxpayer. So this is going to work, and it's not going to go to 3,000. We're going to come out of this thing if we control spending and cut taxes and intervene before these people fail. We're all going to benefit.
Mr. Conley, same question. Do you think Secretary Paulson's move yesterday was the right decision, and do you agree or disagree with some critics who say that the American taxpayer should not own such a large portion of the American banking system?
Well, again, what we're seeing here is large, powerful special interests have gone to Washington. And they've gotten special favors to have record profits. But when it comes to when they're losing, they want to socialize those losses and put it on the backs of the American middle class. And I think it's wrong. And what Secretary Paulson has put out, it's plundering Paulson's Ponzi plan. They're looking at a shell game. The chickens are going to come home to roost. They've already come home to roost in large measure, and it's time that we again start policing Wall Street. We have to take and put effective regulation back in place, and we need to stop trying We need to stop all the foreign expenditures that are going on. That's a great way to have more money in this economy, is to do something about trade so we keep those dollars at home, and we take a look at the empire abroad and all the foreign expenditures where American taxpayers are subsidizing the defense of countries all over the globe. We need those dollars back in our economy.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Conley, this round of questioning, I'll start with you here. What would you tell South Carolina workers tonight, many of whom open up their papers fearful that jobs are going to be disappearing, especially on the state level? Do you have a plan to create new jobs with some new initiatives, and what would that plan look like?
I think one of the best things that we can do to bring jobs back to Americans is, number one, we need to take and reevaluate those trade deals into which the United States has entered in recent years. And we need to withdraw from a number of those trade agreements, especially with Communist China. Communist China is cheating on trade. And if we take and enact the fair tax, that will put our manufacturers back on a level playing field with the imported goods, and that will create jobs in South Carolina. Secondly, we have, depending on which estimates you read, between 21 and 38 million illegal aliens in this land. Those illegal aliens are responsible for taking at least 10 million of our skilled jobs. Additionally, we need to bring an end to the importation of foreign nationals who are taking our tech jobs. I'm an engineer, and I have colleagues who are unemployed and underemployed because of the increased drive by Congress to import foreign nationals. That takes our jobs, it drives down our wages, and my opponent has voted 8 times since the beginning of last year for measures that bring foreign nationals in to take our jobs. I'm standing for America first and South Carolina first.
Senator Graham, along those same lines, realizing that it's a little dicey to talk about New Deal programs with a conservative Republican, would you support an initiative to rebuild America's infrastructure to support jobs here in America for people that we may be needing them soon?
The one thing I've tried to do as a Republican senator from South Carolina is to get involved with the issues that affect our state. Mayor Riley and Mayor Coble from Charleston and Columbia, I've worked closely with them. They're Democrats, but we're trying to improve the infrastructure throughout South Carolina. We've got 11 counties here that are predominantly African American, that with high unemployment, and I'm trying to work with Congressman Clyburn to get a inland port in Orangeburg that would create hope and opportunity. Yeah, I want to be a partner with all the people of South Carolina, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, to try to improve our lot in life. And the way you do that is you make sure you keep taxes low. I'll put my record of cutting taxes with anybody in the Congress. I'll put my record with controlling spending with anybody in the Congress. The way you create jobs is you make sure that the tax code is business friendly. We have the second highest tax rate in the entire world, and the worst thing we could do is make it larger. I want the tax rates for business to go from 35 to 25. I want you to have an option about which tax system you want to get in. I'm a flat tax guy. But if you want to do the fair tax, let's do that, but let's repeal the income tax first. The worst thing you could do is have a fair tax and the income tax. So when it comes to creating jobs and building South Carolina, one, we got to work together. We got to have realistic solutions. And I do believe in legal immigration. If BMW wants to expand up in Greenville and they need a German engineer to come here and help us, I want to give that German engineer a temporary worker permit so they can help grow business here in South Carolina. I'm not going to build a wall around America. I'm going to be realistic when it comes to trade and a tax system that works to grow jobs here at home.
Leroy, you have the next round of questioning. And Mr. Conley, please.
Mr. Conley, just on the theme of jobs, my father is 61 years old. He worked for 33 years at the same job here in South Carolina. He made his living 1 hour at a time, like a lot of us who work hard. After 33 years in July, he was given a pink slip. His company downsized. He served his country. He was in the National Guard for 26 years. What obligation, if any, do you think that the government has to workers like him who are displaced after working so hard, and in light of our current economic climate where his 401k is worth a whole lot less and he is on the doorstep of retirement?
Now, those 401ks have gone to 201ks practically overnight, and they're going to be 101ks pretty soon. And thanks thanks to the repeal of regulations by our Congress in the past decade, and thanks to this increased meddling by the federal government. I think what we need to do is look out for Americans first, Leroy. We need to be looking out for South Carolinians and Americans first, so that we have those jobs. So we still have those jobs here in the United States that have gone abroad to places like communist China. The jobs that have gone, thanks to free trade agreements that my opponent has voted for, to Oman and Peru and the Ukraine. It's time that we withdraw from the World Trade Organization. My opponent voted against withdrawal from the World Trade Organization. I think that's what we need to do, so we have these jobs here at home, so that your father would not be laid off, so that your father would still be working there.
Senator Graham, my dad's watching. What's government's role in helping a displaced worker like him?
Well, the first thing your dad needs to hear from their senator is what the senator really thinks. We live in a global economy, and that's not going to go away. China and India are real competitors of this country. What I'd like to see happen for your dad is a chance to get back in the job market. If he's lost his job because of downsizing, because of the global economy, let's send him back to a technical school and give him a skill that will allow him to get back into the marketplace and not play this game that there's nobody else in the world. If you want to make sure that his grandkids, who he loves dearly, I'm sure, can get a job, let's give them a world-class education by Democrats and Republicans working together here in South Carolina. Let's have a tax code that will not drive people offshore because America wants too much of business income, and stop playing this class warfare game. Your dad's 61. He will soon be eligible for Social Security, but the question I have for your father is, what do you want me to do for your grandkids? I want to save Social Security so it will be there for your grandkids. And if we don't do something as Democrats and Republicans soon, it's going to go bankrupt. So let's give your dad a chance to get back in this global economy by sending him to a technical college so that he can learn a skill to finish out whatever length of career he wants. But what if you're 51? What if you're 41? What if you're a working mother out there with 2 kids and your job's gone away? Let's get you back into the global economy with skills that will survive what exists out there. So let's don't play this game that we're an island unto ourselves. Let's compete. We can. I know we can, and I'm going to work to make sure we do.
Mr. Conley, you have 30 seconds if you would like to rebut. And a reminder, if anybody would like to, just raise your hand. Let me know.
Take a look at competing. American workers, we cannot compete with what is slave labor in communist China, where you have people out working for 6 cents an hour and less in garment plants. Well, we've lost our textile industry here in South Carolina. And when we look at retraining, if you take a look, the Duke University Dean of the College of Engineering announced late last year that he was unable to place 40% of his graduates. 40% of his graduates at Duke. And this is at the same time these H-1Bs and the other work visas are increased. And I think it's wrong that those people continue to be brought in while Americans are unemployed and underemployed.
Number one, you got to understand the law you're talking about. You cannot hire under the H-1B program or any other legal immigration program, someone from another place until you prove no American will take the job at a competitive wage. But there are places in South Carolina where you can advertise in the local community for the job to be filled, and if nobody will take it, I don't want to punish the employer. If BMW wants to expand and they need a German engineer who understands how to build a plant, they're welcome to come here and help us expand business. If you're a coastal community and you can't find workers to service in the service industry, and you try and you advertise, bring people in so the employer doesn't go out of business. This idea that there's no room in America for legal immigration, I think is just not American.
But let me let both of you know that immigration will be discussed here before the hour is over.
And I would say it's un-American that those students at Duke University are not getting the jobs here in America, and folks are being brought in from overseas to take those jobs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Conley. We're going to stick with the economy here for a while. We'll get back to immigration. Senator Graham, you talked about Social Security, the coming entitlement wave with the baby boomers who are about to retire, already retiring. Warren Buffett, of all people, sounding the alarm, saying that coupled with the national debt and the ongoing budget deficit are ticking time bombs. We had similar type warnings with this financial crisis crisis here, but nobody seemed to listen. And again, with the deficit and the debt, it's not discussed. You hear it on the presidential campaign trail, nobody ever brings it up. Are you guys in Washington missing another crisis right now as we speak?
As the senator from South Carolina, I put together a comprehensive Social Security solvency plan. I was the only guy in the entire Senate that had a plan that would lead to solvency, and I asked for Democrats to come join me, and I couldn't find one. So it's going to take bipartisanship like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan. What's happened? In 1955, when I was born, there were 16 workers for every Social Security retiree. Today there's 3, and in 20 years there's going to be 2. My mom and dad owned small businesses in central South Carolina. When I was 21, my mom died. When I was 22, my dad died. And I'm the first person in my family to go to college. If it weren't for Social Security survivor benefits to my 13-year-old sister, we'd have a hard time making it. So let me tell you how you solve this problem. You look people in the eye and you tell them there's a way to solve it, but we're going to have to sacrifice together. The age has got to change based on reality. The good news is that we're living a lot longer. The age for Social Security needs to be adjusted. People that make as much money as I do, $160,000 a year, when I retire, I'm willing to have my benefits recalculated, and I'll take $10 a month less so that working people can get their full check. So we got to sit down and let younger workers invest their money in a safe, sound way so they'll have more when they retire. I am dead serious, and I will work with any Republican and any Democrat to make sure that Social Security is saved, because I know what it's like to need it. And I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and watch it go bankrupt. And I've been criticized by Republicans for putting on the table ways to recalculate benefits and more income to save the system. So be it. We're going to fix it. Lindsey Graham's going to lead the way in the next Congress.
Mr. Conley, along those same lines, the deficit now, or the actual total of the debt, somewhere around $10 trillion by the latest estimates. More than half of that has been accrued here in this decade. Baby boomers, as I said, about to inundate the system. Are we going to be able to afford it? Do you believe that 10 years from now, people will be able to receive their full entitlement to Social Security and Medicare as well to go along with that?
The best way we can take and address this problem is the fair tax. It's revenue neutral. Contrary to what my opponent has said, it does do away with not only the income tax, but also payroll taxes and a plethora of other taxes. And it will fund Social Security. And at the same time, we're taking a look at this federal deficit, this federal debt. I mean, the actions up on the Hill in the past couple of weeks have added almost 10% to that federal debt. It's been an increase, and my opponent voted for it.
Leroy, you have the next round of questions, if you would, to Senator Graham.
Senator Graham, you have requested and accepted earmarks, and that has become an issue in Washington, D.C. because of, I think, the political process at this time has said that earmarks are a problem and are symbolic or symptomatic of out-of-control spending.
Right.
Were earmarks the right thing to do for South Carolina, considering we're a poor state, considering we've had a tradition of it, and considering at some level there's an expectation that you will bring home money to fund projects that otherwise would not get funded?
I joined a group with Senator McCain and others called the Fiscal Overwatch Group. If an earmark is identified in the budget, it's authorized by the appropriate committee, and everybody understands where the money's going to go, and your fellow senators get a chance to understand where the money's going to go, and they vote on it, I think that's appropriate. I have tried to work with my delegation to bring money back to South Carolina for road, water, sewer. We have $4 million for the MRAMP program in Charleston. They were about to shut it down. The Pentagon was saying they didn't need these mine-resistant vehicles. I said I thought we did. They just wanted to up-armor the Humvee. Well, the MRAMPs that you see in Iraq that have saved so many lives, they're built here in South Carolina, and I got $4 million to keep the line open at a time when it was being closed. So I think senators and congressmen should have a say about how to spend the federal money in the federal budget, but I think this corruption in Washington where people put earmarks in it no one's ever seen. People going to jail because companies are giving them money to get these earmarks. That's what's wrong. I want transparency. I'll put my name by the earmark. I'll put it in the paper. But I do believe that the best way for us to control spending in Washington would be a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. Neither party seems to have the will to do it. So if you want to do something different, put Washington in the same boat as South Carolina. Let's put on the table a constitutional amendment to balance the federal budget so both parties will have to do it.
Mr. Conley, if you were elected, would you accept earmarks?
No. In fact, I think that's one of the big problems we have in Washington is the careerism. I think Tom Coburn addressed that very well in the book that he wrote about 6 years ago. And when you take a look at all of the earmarks, I think it's time, first of all, we need to inoculate members of Congress against trichinosis. That pork barrel spending up there is just out of control. And we take a look at our soon-to-be senior senator, Jim DeMint. And he has sworn off of the earmarks. And we take a look at Tom Coburn. We take a look at a lot, and we have Democrats who have sworn off the earmarks too. I think it's something that we're seeing. It wasn't that long ago that my opponent indicated he was part of the problem. He is part of the problem. Earmarks are part of the problem. It was in the 80s that Ronald Reagan took and vetoed a bill with just a handful of earmarks. And now you see the huge volume of them that have come up. And it's time to say no to earmarks. If there's something we need, it needs to be to go through the proper appropriation process and be in the proper appropriation bill.
Mr. Conley, I'm trying to get a clear idea of exactly what you believe in terms of regulating the financial markets. Some of your campaign literature lately saying you would not support the bailout, allow the markets to correct themselves. However, you've brought up the fact that deregulation was part of the cause why we're sitting here today. What exactly is your stance on regulation? It seems that deregulation, the ascendant philosophy there in Washington for the last quarter century. Would you work to reverse those trends?
Yes, and one thing very specifically in terms of deregulation. We see the Financial Services Modernization Act that passed in late 1999. And it tore down the walls of separation between banking, insurance, and brokerage that we had had on the books since the wake of the Great Depression. And we need to have more transparency. Not only that, but we need more transparency with Wall Street. We need to take and audit the Fed. And the Federal Reserve is controlling all of our money. It's controlling the value of our currency. It's time that we have some real congressional oversight and an audit of the Fed. And it's time that these banks who have been able to take and collect those bad loans and send them upstream, it's time that that stops. If a local bank is putting out bad loans, it shouldn't go all the way up to Wall Street to where some large mega corporation has so much of this toxic paper that it becomes a threat to our national economy.
Senator Graham, a more generalized, broad question for you. Reading the account of one of your aides that was in Oconee County Thursday night, really got an earful from Republican supporters up there, angry about the current state of things. I've had a lot of people ask me, where were the folks looking out for us? Was anybody looking out for us? Is it fair to ask that folks in Washington, D.C. should have seen some of this trouble coming down the road?
In 2004, Senator McCain, one of my dearest friends, made a speech about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are government-backed organizations, mortgage broking firms where the government basically is standing in the background looking over their shoulder, saying these things are getting out of control and we need to do something about it. In 2006, Lindsey Graham, John McCain, a bunch of other senators wrote to the Senate leadership saying we need to bring a bill to the floor to regulate Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Because what happened is that Barney Frank and Chris Dodd and our Democratic colleagues have been pushing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to get in the mortgage business, the Community Reinvestment Act requiring banks to lend a certain percentage of their money to folks, quite frankly, can't afford to pay back. There are 3 million mortgages out there, about $250,000 in value, where the people who got the mortgage make $25,000 or $30,000 as combined as a couple, and that's come back to haunt us. We've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years, and quite frankly, our Democratic friends have been pushing Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to expand mortgage availability to people who could not afford these mortgages, and it's come back to haunt us. And the way you get out of this mess is that you learn from your mistakes, you control these organizations, and you make sure this never happens again. You put capital into the banking system and the financial market so you can get loans, but I am dead set on making sure that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac severs this relationship. Been trying to do it for 4 years between the government and the financial markets in a way that has created this chaos.
Leroy?
Turn the page a little.
One thing, Leroy.
Sure.
If we go back
30 seconds.
If we go back 3 or 4 years, we see that both houses of Congress were under Republican control. So to say that Democrats or another party could have objected and stopped what a Republican plan was in place, that's ludicrous. 3 or 4 years ago, if this was a big thing to accomplish, that was the time to accomplish it when you were in the majority.
Well, if I may, Secretary Snow came to the Congress and testified and warned us about these government organizations called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And we have a closely divided Congress. And every member, virtually every member of the Banking Committee in the House and in the Senate joined up with 1 or 2 Republicans to stop this reform measure. No louder voice has been spoken in support of reforming Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac than Lindsey Graham and John McCain, and there's a record to prove it. Now that's the past. What are we going to do in the future? We need to deal with these organizations anew and never let this happen again to the American people.
Leroy?
Turn the page to foreign policy. Victory in Iraq. Simple question. What does it look like? And according to what you know now about on-the-ground conditions, how long do you think victory would be achieved if you had to guess?
Well, Leroy, thanks to a lot of brave young Americans and a wonderful general called David Petraeus, victory is in sight. And victory in Iraq means that we're safer. My definition of winning in Iraq is that when we come home, and we're coming home, all the combat brigades that made up the surge are now home, is that the country we leave behind, a Muslim nation in the heart of the Mideast, will be a transformed place. It will be a place where a woman, through the rule of law, can have her say about her children. It will be a Muslim nation, an Arab nation, run by a Shia majority that would say no to Iranian ambitions. It is a place that looked al-Qaeda in the eye and fought back. And Iraq, in the heart of the Mideast, that believes in the rule of law, an ally with us in the greater war on terror, a buffer to Iran, a place that rejects the al-Qaeda agenda. This makes us safer. And I am very proud of the role I played for the last several years to make sure that we did not withdraw and in such a way to let Iraq fail and become a wider war. Of all the things I've done in the Senate, the one I think I'm most proud of, quite frankly, is having the vision and guts to stand with Senator McCain and tell my fellow senators we can't lose this war, and argue for a change in strategy called the surge. The surge has worked. Our troops are coming home, and we're going to leave in victory, and we're going to have an ally in Iraq, not a dictator called Saddam Hussein.
How long do you think that's going to?
I think I'm going to let General Petraeus and General Odinero tell us when, but the troops are drawing down now. The worst thing we can do is have a bunch of politicians who are worried about polls decide what to do in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I'm going to listen to the generals, and I want our troops home very badly. I've been there a dozen times. But you know what they want? They want to win. History will judge us not by the day we all left Iraq, but by what we left behind. We're on the verge of winning this thing, and if you set a timetable, a hard timetable for withdrawal, you undercut all the advantages and advances we've made. So I'm going to let the generals lead us to victory.
Ms. Conley, same question. What does victory in Iraq look like? And do you, according to what you know now, can you say when do you think troops would be drawn down and we'd be withdrawing from Iraq?
Well, it's been more than 5 years since the Iraqi military was defeated on the field. It's been more than 5 years since we saw President Bush on an aircraft carrier with a big banner behind him that said mission accomplished. It's been more than 5 years since we heard President Bush say it was the end of major combat operations. What we're doing is we're using our military in some kind of police state, nation building over in the Middle East. We're trying to tell the Iraqis what to do. And it's time that we hand the baton off to Iraq so that they can take care of themselves. And each time we take and turn a province or region over to Iraqis, the number of our troop strength needs to be withdrawn. Those folks need to be redeployed home to their families where they belong, and it's something we need to wrap up soon. We need to hand this off to the Iraqis. It's their country. They don't need an American occupying force there. Here in South Carolina, we take a look at our history. Francis Marion. You take a look at Wade Hackman. We know what it's like down here to have dealt with a foreign military occupying force, and it's time that we get the Iraqis trained up and we hand their country back to them, and it's going to be a much safer world, much safer world.
The way it will be a much safer world is to make sure we win in Iraq. There's been an increase of the Iraqi army by 130,000 since the surge began. The Iraqi people and the Iraqi army are fighting more and they're paying more. But this whole idea of just leaving and get home as quick as you can and don't worry about what you leave behind, I've rejected. And I know how hard it's been on our men and women. I have been there a dozen times. I've been there with people who've been there 3 and 4 times. We are on the verge of getting it right, and I am going to trust General Petraeus and General Odinero to tell us how to get out, because they're the ones that turned this around, and we're on the verge of winning this thing, and how we get out is very important for the long-term national security interests of this country, and I'm going to listen to the generals that I trust.
One more rebuttal, Mr. Conley.
I know you've been there, Lindsay. We saw the rugs that you bought.
Yeah.
We need to worry about securing our borders and not the borders of Iraq.
So when are we coming home?
You're asking our military to engage in non-military activity. You're asking them to engage in policing another country. You're asking them to engage in nation building. And the purpose of our military is to go out and kill people and break things, not to build another nation.
If I may.
Indeed.
As I understand what we were doing in Iraq is that we replaced a dictator who was shooting at our planes as part of a UN no-fly zone, a dictator that was defying UN weapons inspection, a person who was sending money to suicide bombers. The Saddam Hussein regime was a cancer in the Mideast, and we're not going there as occupiers. We're going there to try to turn this world around. Al-Qaeda came there to make sure that we would lose. Al-Qaeda and bin Laden said, go to Iraq, because their worst nightmare is a country where a woman can have a say about her children. People of different religions can live together. We've been in Iraq fighting an enemy who would kill us if they could. When Al-Qaeda decided to go to Iraq and take us on, it was so important that we win. And thank God to General Petraeus, we have delivered a punishing blow to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and that makes us safer.
Senator Graham, regarding Afghanistan, another troubling issue here. This week, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, said that, quote, trends across the board are not going in the right direction. A situation he refers to as another, quote, a downward spiral. How can it be 5.5 years after routing the Taliban, the U.S. Armed Forces should be on their heels there right now? There's been a lot of criticism that perhaps we as a country took our eye off the ball. Is that true?
Not at all. Losing in Iraq doesn't make us better able to win in Afghanistan. NATO has been in charge of Afghanistan militarily. We need to change the rules of engagement of NATO. We need more NATO troops. But Afghanistan is different than Iraq. They're not sitting on a bunch of natural resources. Their biggest commodity is drugs. Their central government in Kabul doesn't have much of a reach. The biggest problem is the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan called Waziristan, where the Pakistan government really doesn't have any ability to govern. General Petraeus is now head of Central Command. He is going to Afghanistan, and he's going to come back and tell us in Congress the plan for Afghanistan. And I have every confidence in the world that General Petraeus will come up with a similar strategy for Afghanistan as he devised in Iraq. It will be military power. It will be economic power. It will be coalition building. It will be isolating the enemy from the population as a whole. It will involve Pakistan. So I know this war is long, I know it's difficult, and I know it's tough. And my opponent has said, let's just pick up and leave. Let's become Fortress America. He has said publicly he wants all of our troops out of Afghanistan. Here's what I want to do for Afghanistan. I want to make sure that that country is secured in such a way as that no one will ever use that country again to plan an attack against this country.
Mr. Conley, Afghanistan has been historically a very difficult country to subdue, at least militarily. Given what Mr. Graham just said here, what would you have done differently? Or what policy would you have argued for that the military should be working towards?
Yeah, we take a look at Afghanistan and we see a country that has never been successfully invaded and occupied by a foreign force. We go back 20 years ago and we see this was one of the leading causes of the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And right now, with our military being so strung out across the globe, when we take a look and see the portion of our National Guard units that aren't capable of even equipment to train for, and we see, again, our economic situation. This is bleeding America dry, just like the attempted occupation of Afghanistan brought down the Soviet Union. If we continue to try to occupy Afghanistan, it's going to accelerate the demise of the United States. And Admiral McMullen is 100% correct in his assessment. And as Senator Graham pointed out, they have the drug economy is a big part of Afghanistan. Well, when you take a look and you see the poppy production there now and what has happened in recent years, it is way up. So what we're doing is spending American treasure and spending American lives and continuing to drive down our economy for an occupation that was really doomed from the beginning.
If I may, I think we've had 2,000 guardsmen go to Afghanistan from South Carolina. I had the pleasure of visiting them. If you see them in your community, ask them what they thought about Afghanistan. Ask them, were you occupying this country? I think that's so offensive to our military. They're going
what's
over
offensive,
there.
Senator?
You can respond. After the Russians left Afghanistan, we ignored Afghanistan, and the Taliban filled the vacuum. The one thing you need to understand in this war on terror, if I'm your senator, I'm going to make sure that we fight them over there so we don't have to fight them here. I'm going to make sure that we align ourselves with forces of moderation in Afghanistan and Iraq and work with Pakistan to deny safe haven, financing, and keep the enemy on their heels. To those men and women from South Carolina who went to Afghanistan to help build that nation up so it wouldn't become a terrorist safe haven again, God bless you. I don't look at you as occupiers. I look at you as patriots.
Mr. Conley, you have one last chance to rebut this point.
One thing I'd like to say on the last point he made here, what I'm addressing here is the policymakers in Washington misusing our military. Plain and simply. And we take a look at the Taliban. The Taliban was created by our intervention during the Soviet occupation. This interventionist foreign policy has to end. It has to end.
Leroy, if you would direct your next question to Mr. Conley here for this next round.
A question specifically for you, Mr. Conley. Who in the U.S. Senate most closely represents an ideal U.S. senator and why?
In all honesty, I don't think we have any specific individual there who does represent an ideal U.S. senator. When I think of the senators I hold in high esteem and the senators that I'll be most closely working with, I see John Tester from Montana and I see Tom Coburn from Oklahoma.
Okay. Senator Graham, I won't ask you that question, but I am curious about one thing regarding judges. One of you will be elected during a time when we could seat 2 more Supreme Court justices. Looking at polling about who's going to be in the Senate over the next 4 to 6 years, possibly, you could have 60 Democrats. Your supporters will expect you to make sure that conservative judges are seated throughout the federal system. How would you do that if the Democrats hit that 60 mark?
Well, let me tell you, I hope my friend John McCain is president for many reasons, but no bigger reason than the appointment of judges. If you like Alito and Roberts, then there's more to come if Senator McCain becomes President McCain. But as a senator, it is my job to advise and consent. It is my job to make sure that the nominee is qualified. And that's what I will do. I will make sure that my vote is cast in support of qualified nominees. I was involved in an exercise to keep the Senate from blowing up. We had Democrats filibustering Bush nominees and bringing the Senate to a halt in an unprecedented way. We were able, with Senator McCain's help and Senator Lieberman's help, to get 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans to break the filibuster so Alito and Roberts and many other conservative judges would get on the bench and preserve the minority the right to say no in extraordinary circumstances. So if I'm a member of the minority and Senator Obama gets to be president, I will treat his judges fairly. But I'm not going to sit on the sidelines and watch the court be stacked with a bunch of liberals who may be too ideological in their bent to not be fair-minded judges. But if he does win, Senator Obama, I will work with him to find qualified people, understanding he would pick people different than I would. But I'm very proud of the fact that I was one of the senators that prevented the minority in the Senate from losing all say about how a judge would be appointed. And if I'm in the minority, which I hope I'm not, I will have a say.
Senator Graham, regarding energy, the #1 nonfiction bestseller this week is a book called Hot, Flat, and Crowded, a book by Thomas Friedman.
Yeah.
He argues for an American initiative. Geo-greenism is what he calls it, that energy technology can help usher in a brave new economy and one that really might save the environment at the same time. Is this something that, in general, that you would agree with?
Yeah, I do believe that man-made emissions are hurting the planet. I do believe that global warming is somewhat man-made. And the best thing for America is to become more energy independent. Not only would it be good for the environment not to use so much fossil fuel, we would be safer if we were not importing so much foreign oil from countries who don't like us very much. And this relationship we have with Mideast oil is not healthy. And I'm ready to drill off the coast of South Carolina. I want a buffer zone to protect our coast because tourism is so important. And if we do drill off the coast of South Carolina, I think South Carolina, if she gives her consent, should get part of the revenue. I am for nuclear power. Savannah Riverside in South Carolina could be the place that we recycle spent fuel like the French do. We haven't built a nuclear power plant in America in 34 years because we can't deal with the waste. It goes back to the Jimmy Carter doctrine. The French, the Japanese, they deal with nuclear waste by recycling the waste so you don't have to put it in the ground to begin with. We could do that in South Carolina. Hydrogen research going on in Greenville and at Aiken, South Carolina, and here at the University of South Carolina to build a car with a hydrogen fuel cell. South Carolina could benefit as much as any state in the nation if we got to be energy independent, and that means all the above. Drilling, nuclear power, alternative energy, hybrid cars. To me, it's just not an economic, environmental problem. It is a national security problem, and it's going to take Democrats and Republicans working together, and 20 of us came together with a pretty comprehensive approach that I think will be the baseline for the next Congress to get us to energy independence.
Mr. Conley, living along the coast as you do, I moderated a debate with the 1st Congressional District last week, and a lot of viewers flooded my inbox with requests to talk about global warming. Many along the coast fearful that one day the seas might rise if the Earth continues to warm. Is this real in your mind?
No, if we take a look at what, not just what we're hearing from special interest here in the United States, but if we take a look at what academics are publishing in Europe and elsewhere, the single largest factor that drives climate is that big orange disk we see 93 million miles away. And to think that it really is the arrogance of man to think that we are having any effect. I'm an engineer, so I understand that we don't have constant things in the physical world. We have a lot of fluctuations. And when we see, looking back, how we have had fluctuations in temperature over time, and when we see how when I was a child we were told, well, there was global cooling. We've been told in recent years, well, there's global warming. Well, then last year was the coolest record in the recent trend. It's something I don't think we ought to be making really haphazard statements of policy or trying to change policies on this item. And I want to say here, we finally have a place where we agree, Senator. We need energy independence. We need energy independence now where we're not importing our oil from overseas. And one of the best ways we go about doing that is we require that the federal fleet, we're talking over 600,000 vehicles, require that the federal fleet start running on alternative energy sources. And if we take a look also and say, hey, the gasoline and the diesel and the Jet A the Department of Defense uses, we need to say by 2015, at least 50% of that needs to come from clean coal technology so our military is not dependent upon oil from foreign lands.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Leroy, your next question directed at Mr. Graham.
Senator Graham, here in South Carolina, tuition for colleges is rising sharply, and the ability for families to pay for it, of course, is certainly in doubt now, given our economic conditions. What does the federal government need to do in order to make college more affordable? You mentioned earlier that education is that ticket to the middle class. What can they do?
You know, when my parents died, I was in college, going to law school, Pell Grants. Based on the income of the family, you can get a grant to go to college. And we've expanded since I've been in the Senate and the House fairly dramatically the amount of money available to low-income families in the form of Pell Grants. And we've let the grant grow so much that sort of middle and upper class families are getting the grant money. I want to direct it toward the moderate and low income families. So Pell Grants we can do, improving student loan availability and access and affordability. That's why you can't let banks collapse. If we sit on the sidelines and watch the banking institutions in this country come to their knees, all of us are going to pay a heavy price. So improve the access and affordability of student loans, Pell Grants, and work-study programs. And one thing I'm very proud of, in 10 years, half the teachers in this country are going to be retired. I, along with some other Republicans and Democrats, passed a bill that says that if you'll go into special education or you'll go to a Title I school and teach in the area of math and science, we'll forgive your student loan up to $20,000 as a way to entice the best and brightest to go into urban and rural poor areas. So the federal government can be a partner, but the primary obligation of education lies with the local community and the state, but we can be a good partner.
Leroy, one final question for Mr. Conley here.
Okay. One final question. The issue of immigration, you mentioned it earlier. Should there be a path to citizenship for the millions of undocumented workers who are here in the country? There was a great debate, of course, back when the Senate offered a plan that did have a path to citizenship, and that became a deal breaker. In your opinion, should there be a path?
No. Those who have illegally entered our country should not be rewarded with the most valuable commodity on earth, which is United States citizenship. And this is another one of the big differences between me and my opponent, is that he wants to give amnesty to these folks whose first act on American soil was breaking our law. When we take a look and we see that South Carolina has the highest unemployment rate in 15 years, and when we see the number of job losses, we need to take, number one, we need to secure that border. Number two, we need to have some workplace enforcement so that the criminal employers who are hiring these illegals actually pay. Then what we're going to see, once that job magnet dries up, those illegals are going to go home, just like they've done in states that have enacted tough statutes, like Arizona, Georgia, and Oklahoma.
I'm afraid we've reached the end of our round of questioning now, but each of you has a little bit of time to address the audience, about a minute or so. Senator Graham, I'll allow you to go first again, and Mr. Conley will have the last word.
We're going to solve our immigration problems working together. We need a national solution because when people leave Arizona, they can go to Berkeley, California. I want to make sure that nobody stays in this country legally, that we don't know who they are, that you learn our language. If you want to be a citizen, you got to leave the country, start over, and go back where you came from and find a practical, workable solution to this tough problem. But there's one thing I want you to remember. This idea that we brought this war on ourselves, that by being in Afghanistan that we made bin Laden mad at us, that's just a bunch of bull. We're fighting people who hate us, and we've done nothing to deserve their hate. They're ideological, they have a unbelievably distorted view of religion. They've hijacked a great religion, and they hate our way of life. And I can promise you, above all else, that I'm going to try to make sure that your family is secure and prosperous by having a tax code that will allow us to compete in this global economy, to have immigration policy that makes sense and that's doable, and to make sure that we fight this vicious enemy as far away from the homeland as possible. And to those who have done the fighting, God bless you. You're not occupying anywhere. You're making us free and safe.
Thank you very much, Senator. Mr. Conley, you have the final word, sir.
Job of a United States Senator is to represent his state, and that means representing the people of his state in their interest. I'm running for United States Senate so that we once again have an advocate for South Carolina in this seat. As your next U.S. Senator, I will be a strong fighter, warrior, and champion for the people of South Carolina, and the fiercest fighter for America First policies in Washington. America First policy when it comes to the economy. No more bailouts for Wall Street at the expense of Main Street. America First with jobs, energy, immigration, trade, foreign policy, and monetary policy. I'm running to give you a voice in Washington, and to give you that voice, I need your votes, I need your contributions, I need your work, and I especially need your prayers these next 25 days. Come join with me. Let's take our country back, and with God's help, a better future.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate your participation in this debate here tonight. Leroy Chapman, appreciate you and your questions here tonight as well.